Cut down day all across the NFL, and the Commanders have trimmed their list from 90 to 53. Some surprises, clearly some statements about the past. Let's have a podcast. What up, everybody? It's JP Finley. This is Beltway Football. We're brought to you by Oarsman Automotive of Virginia. We ride with them. Want you to do the same thing. Check them out, oarsmanva.com. 7 locations all across Northern Virginia. The big man's here. Mitch, should I do that right?
Yeah. What would you have done wrong?
I don't know. So cut down day. I have long thought, if you've listened to this podcast for a long time, we kind of have a similar philosophy on cut down day. There's a lot of angst, a lot of acrimony about something that we know 90% of already. And it's just a real bad day for a lot of guys that I don't think should be like celebrated like sometimes it is. Regardless, I think the overarching thing looking at this is just how significant the roster overhaul is. From last year's draft class, 7 picks, there's now only 2 remaining. That's Forbes and Quan Martin. Forbes had a really rough rookie season. We can go through specific guys that surprised us, but I think between the Dotson trade last week and then cut down today, it's a big time reminder of how significant the staff and Adam Peters believe this overhaul, this recalibration, this rebuild really is and needs to be, and of how much work remains to be done, man. Specifically, it's a condemnation of the work the previous regime put together, frankly. I saw something, Jake Russell, that 13 of 33 possible picks are still here from the Ron era. 12 of 33. That's bad, dude. And that shows you how kind of far behind the 8 ball this team is.
Yeah, I think when you look at the Rivera picks and the percentages and all that, I think that gives you a pretty big clue as to where this team is and what they're thinking of this year. I think it's 34 players are new from last year's initial 53-man roster. That's pretty huge. They're in a pretty big hole that they're trying to dig out of. And as we talk about this roster and honestly this season, I think that kind of the way that things went today gives you a pretty good idea of what this front office thinks. At that introductory press conference when Adam Peters was asked what he thinks about this roster and that big old pregnant pause was there, I think that told you a whole lot about how they were feeling. And now fast forward a few months later and you're seeing it when you look at what, who made the team and who didn't.
Somebody had a good tweet, and forgive me, I don't know who it was, but I did retweet you, so hopefully that helps, where they listed it out and then they showed that video of Peters saying what remains, right?
Real quick, the Kyle Shanahan quote today,
so perfect.
The dude hates talking to the media and just occasionally just has absolute gold when it come out of his mouth, and he basically has just said, no 53-man roster on cutdown day has been the final 53-man roster, whatever it was. And it's an astute point. And there's
totally. You know what I think it is with Kyle? Occasionally he just tells the truth. And I thought
very occasionally, for the record.
And it's been a long time. We're going to let things go. It's been a long time. Let it go.
No, that's not about that. But telling the truth is
very few NFL coaches ever tell the truth. But
correct.
Kyle's quote, and I thought Dan Quinn in his brief media avail said the same thing. This is an initial 53. I don't think people should get too caught up on too much because within 48 hours, they've got the number 2 waiver claim. A lot is going to change. Then when some of these guys don't even have to clear waivers, the real roster is next Wednesday that takes the field before the Tampa game. But there's still plenty to react to today. Some guys specifically, you want to go through position group? You want to go line by line of the guys that got cut?
Let's start with the hat tip to the 2 guys, Colson Yankoff and Tyler Owens, who before this training camp weren't on anybody's roster or really radar as far as players that are going to make this roster. Even Yankoff, I don't think before today, I really thought that I thought he was going to be a practice squad guy, and I know they kind of liked him. I don't know that I really thought he was going to make the roster, but hats off to him. He clearly, showed this group they want these guys that can do a couple different things. I think he's kind of like a Ben Sennett light type player where he can be kind of your blocking tight end, but also line up in some different formations and do some different things. Surprising, but also great for the kid.
Yeah, man. The Owens story, to the folks who listen to this pod and you and I, when we're deep in the weeds, that's not a surprise. So we don't not that we don't recognize, but it's
No,
still an awesome story. It's an undrafted kid and a position of some depth that I'd say for the last 2 weeks was in my mind on the roster because that's the level of play he brought. And then Yankov is an awesome story, and it's somebody going back to the first rookie minicamp in the bubble. I liked him. I liked him all along. And dude, his name is funny. Like we can all accept that. He's probably heard every joke in the world. This guy was in a college locker room at UCLA for, I believe, 5 years, and then a high school locker room before that. Whatever Yankoff joke you want to make, he's heard it. I also, and he deserves a ton of credit. I also think there were a bunch of guys, but two guys specifically going into Sunday night that we think could have fought their way on that I think the opposite happened, and that's Cole Turner and Bryson Tremaine. If you think about Yankoff making it, Zach Ertz is going to be a real option for this team. Zach Ertz is going to play no special teams. Zach Ertz is not a significant help for you in a goal line or a jumbo package. When you need half a yard and you're trying to go heavy, you're probably not going to have Ertz on the field. And maybe you don't always want to take him off because that eliminates maybe some play action stuff, whatever. But the goal with Ertz is to manage his body and his reps so that he can go 17 games. And I don't know that Cole Turner helps you with that. Cole Turner's best skill is route running and maybe his hands, even though that didn't look it Sunday night.
I think that's a good point, though. He had a chance to play his way onto the roster. Cole Turner, I think maybe even Cole Turner possibly had a roster spot heading into that game. Not that one game is, making the difference one way or the other.
I think
but
it was a coin flip at best. But
those two plays on that first drive back to back are just if you are a pass catching tight end and if you're not a blocker and your calling card is your hands and your route running and speed and all those different things, you got to show him off. And he's been a training camp superstar for 3 years now, the past 2 seasons and this year, but never really showed it in games. So it's surprising, but I'm not upset about it.
Yankoff, they clearly like his physicality, his willingness, and if he's active, he'll play every special. And you might kind of have him active because Ertz is going to play none of them. I think that was like a specific positional thing that helped. But you're right. Those two guys deserve a ton of credit. I mean, think about it. From last year's draft, there's 2 picks remaining, and there were 2 undrafted. The same amount of undrafted guys made the initial roster as last year's draft. Yikes. We can run through name by name, which may be kind of useful. And the guys that we're not surprised by, we can kind of just keep it moving.
Position by position too could work. Whatever you want to do.
Kaz Allen doesn't make it. Wide receiver, running back. I don't know if you agree. I kind of think that's the right call. When he fumbled this preseason, when they're trying to work him in as a running back, I get that he is exciting with the ball in his hands, but I just don't know that I trust the ball in his hands enough to roll the dice. There's practice squad potential there, but a lot of it's going to depend on what happens around the rest of the league.
Yeah, I think there's practice squad potential. I know I would think he's going to be back because I think this group wants to make Kaz Allen happen as far as the kick return game and maybe wide receiver game. I'm interested to see how the kickoff stuff happens because I do think teams are going to ultimately just end up kicking the ball into the end zone and not be a ton of returns. The problem was offensively, he wasn't able to catch the ball or hold on to it. And I'm not just talking about in games. I'm talking about in practices. We saw this, and I don't know that he was that crisp of a route runner. And then combine that with the fact that he wasn't able to really hang on the balls that much. I'm not surprised they didn't make it. I do think keeping just 6 receivers makes Colson Yankoff being active on game day a thing, because typically that 7th receiver is kind of your inactive guy. So there might be a spot there for it, but I also don't
Sometimes it's only 5 wideouts active, honestly.
Right. I'm saying they'll keep 5 wideouts and maybe 1 will be inactive. But I also
if we go through line by line, we're going to be here for hours.
I don't think they're done at receiver is what I would say.
Oh, I think they have the number 2 waiver claim. I think they use that at wideout. I want to make guesses later. Let's go through who made it, and then we'll go through. I am not so quarterbacks. Obviously, Daniels, Mariota. I thought it was Driscoll all along, with Hartman with a chance to maybe make that a battle. Hartman injures his shoulder. That kind of eliminates the battle. I don't think McSorley was ever making it. I think they would like to get Hartman back to this practice squad, but they might look around too.
Yeah, I think if they're not able to get Hartman, I think they might explore McSorley back to a practice squad. But I'm perfectly good with what they did at QB. I know Driscoll wasn't great in preseason, but I do think that you need a second body, especially
You
with
need,
Mariota
yeah,
nursing whatever groin and stuff he's dealing with.
you need an experienced guy. Daniels isn't. Mariota has the groin. You need someone that has been out there. Um,
Yeah,
Running back, Robinson and Eckler all the way. McNichols makes it over Wiley. They liked McNichols. They showed that throughout. Often he was getting the first work after B-Rob and Eckler. I thought Wiley had the better camp in preseason, though.
I agree. I think they'll get Wiley back to the practice squad. I don't know that he's going to get
Um,
signed to a signed to a 53 there.
you do have a draft pick from 2 years ago, last year, that is cut there, and Chris Rodriguez. And that sounds like, if you hadn't listened to the pod since the end of the season and you're just tuning in now, that sounds pretty surprising. But if you watch training camp at the preseason, Rodriguez just wasn't getting carries, didn't seem thrilled about it. This seemed like, as much as Owen seemed on the roster the last couple of weeks, Rodriguez seemed off of it.
Yeah, I think 2 weeks ago we ran my one-on-one with Chris Rodriguez, and that sounded like a player that was resigned to his fate. And I think that it shows that this coaching staff wants more of an athletic running back than a pounder between the tackles, which they can get out of Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler to some extent. But clearly, they wanted somebody who had a little more was a little more fleet of foot and could help them in the passing game.
Wide out, Diami, Luke, Pringle, OZ, Terry, Crowder. Pringle's your kick returner. Crowder's your punt returner. Unless early on Luke will be inactive, which I don't see. I think all six of those guys are dressing, and I think you could be adding a seventh for sure. I don't know that any of those guys is getting cut unless whoever the seventh is. Maybe OZ can return punts for you, but they didn't even dress Crowder in that last preseason game. Like, I think those six,
Yeah,
at least for Tampa, are on the roster.
yeah. Listen, I'll make my quick point on this. As a whole, you look at this roster, and it's about growing towards the future and building towards it. Maybe Byron Pringle helps you there a little bit. I would have rather seen Martavis Bryant in that spot. That kind of last receiver isn't going to see the field much anyway, as you were just talking about, might not even be active. But to have a 6'4" dude with some of the athleticism that Bryant has to be a safety valve for Jaden Daniels in the red zone or in particular packages, I think would be a additive bonus to this team. I don't honestly know what Pringle brings you it kind of in any way to this roster, and I'm surprised that he's on it, and I'm surprised that they went that direction.
I thought Martavis gave himself a real opportunity. I thought the touchdown catch, I thought the block on the Wiley touchdown, sealing that edge. They brought Pringle in before they brought Bryant in.
Right.
Maybe they think they can get him to this practice squad. B-Mitch always talks about this, how, like, when another team tries to claim you, you can just not answer the phone. And, like, there's workarounds. And Bryant was with Dallas last year with Quinn there. And maybe there's something there. I don't know. But it'll be interesting to watch. Bryant also probably gets by on some name value. It's a dude that hasn't played in the NFL in 6 years.
Definitely.
I don't know.
I'm not up in arms about it. It's just I think it's a bit of minutia just based on. I'm surprised that it's Byron Pringle, and if it wasn't going to be Bryant, I thought it should have been Tremaine. It's the last receiver. It's not the end of the world.
Tremaine wasn't good in that last preseason game, though. Probably when he needed.
Yeah.
Tremaine was on the practice squad all last year. Maybe he comes back. We did tight ends. I do wonder if Yankoff, depending what they do on waivers, if, like, that Yankoff spot isn't, one of them that relatively quickly kind of becomes a spot to watch, perhaps. I do expect them. I think it's either wide out or corner with that number 2 waiver claim, just because those are really important positions that maybe at wide out, maybe you get a difference maker, or corner, I think you need. Tight ends we've talked about. You are cutting Cole Turner. I like Cole. I think these guys wanted to see a lot out of him, and he didn't show it, and that stinks, but we'll see what happens for him. I'm going to let you handle the O-line moves if you are prepared for that, big man.
Yeah, I'll be relatively quick with it. I think it was pretty straightforward who the first 8 were. I think Dieter, Biotish, Allegretti, Wiley, Coleman, Paul, Cosme, Lucas were all pretty soundly there. I was surprised that Trent Scott made the roster because I kind of thought that Chris Paul had showed enough to be kind of that fourth tackle slash guard on this roster. Much like you're talking about Colson Yankoff with that roster spot to watch. I think that Trent Scott spot might be an interesting spot to watch with some of the tackles that were cut around the league that they might kind of look at or go after. And so I think it was fairly straightforward there. I think Trent Scott maybe makes sense in the short term. I don't know that he's going to be next Wednesday on this roster, but I guess we'll see what this team does in free agency.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, looking on the offensive side of the ball, Tinsley was on this roster last year, but almost always inactive. Braden Daniels is another draft pick. That's a 4th rounder that you cut. I mean, that is when he was drafted, we were all like, huh? Some of these misses are really pretty significant. Stromberg and Braden Daniels. I mean, that's just really tough. But I'm with you. Not a ton of surprises on the O-line, just because I don't know that. I think they're going to be looking there too. They're going to be looking everywhere. That's obvious. But I don't know how much I love the depth, but we'll see. Chris Paul
No,
gives
I mean, yeah,
variety, some
this is
versatility.
this is a group that needs to be upgraded. We know that. We knew that from the beginning. But as far as the folks that were in camp, this was a group that made sense to make it.
All right, let's go to the D line where it gets a little interesting. Jamin makes this roster as a D end. They keep the draft pick, Javonte Jean-Baptiste. They keep Ridgeway. They keep Mathis. There was a report that they were trying to trade Ridgeway. There was also a report they were trying to trade Stromberg and trying to trade Turner. Clearly, there was no interest in trading them.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
I said, yeah. I mean, you want to trade them, you want to offer them up and see if you can get a conditional 7th or something for them. But let's not trick ourselves that there was anything any more than they would ever get for those guys.
Right. Like I love my 4Runner from Orsman Fairfax Toyota, but I would sure love a Range Rover. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
Alan Payne, Johnny Newton, who they just drafted. You wonder, and I don't know, they've said he's close, should be fine. You wonder if that doesn't create a spot, if there is an IR stint there, maybe not today, but like in the future. Mathis, Farrell. I don't think there's a lot of surprises there. The biggest one is that they released KJ Henry, who I think, has played well when he's gotten opportunities. Not a particularly explosive athlete, but he had the sack in the preseason finale. Maybe they're giving him a lot of burn in that preseason finale to see what he had. He had the sack last year on the Pats that got completely erroneously called for roughing. Any big DN surprises to you? D-line surprises?
My only thought about the KJ Henry was that he's a really solid kind of middle of the road player, kind of high floor, low ceiling. You kind of know what you're going to get from him every day. And when you look at this roster big picture as building towards the future, I think keeping some of these more athletic guys who are younger, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, I think is the one that really sticks out to me there. In the long run, there's more upside with him than there was with KJ Henry. But man, the way that they got rid of all of these draft picks from last year is wild.
Dude, you go back and look at it. Ron cutting Morgan Moses, it was just so unnecessary and such there's a lot of bad moves, but like that one particularly, when you balance that to the O-line and see the level Mo's still playing at. Okay, linebackers making the roster: Luvu, Fowler, Michael Walker, my guy, Dominique Hampton, who was drafted as a safety, makes it as a backer, and then Wagner. Michael Walker's probably your big surprise there. And I thought he earned it. I thought he had a good camp, good preseason. And that's a guy I liked watching probably back by the end of July, early August, that I thought was flying to the ball. And that's what they want, is physical downhill thumpers.
Yeah. You also have to mention Jordan McGee going IR.
Yeah.
Means he's going to miss the first 4 games. He had surgery a little over a week ago, 4 to 6 week recovery. Kind of makes sense. You're talking about week 4, week 5 for him to come back. So I think that'll kind of change the linebacking room once he gets there. I I know that Dominic Hampton was their draft pick and they like him and all those things. I got to be honest, I was kind of surprised. I know you had him, I think, on your roster. We talked about it after the Patriots game. You liked him or thought he was going to be there. I am surprised that he's there, but you know what? This defensive coaching staff has a good track record of working with guys like that. So I'm open to the opportunity. I'm open to the possibility.
Yeah, we'll see. I think DBs is fairly interesting. Let's talk about the guys that are on. Samerstill, Jeremy Chin, Forbes, Noah I, Quan, Forrest, Mike Davis, BSJ, Percy, Reeves, Owens. We already talked about Owens, how cool and fun that story is. You keep 5 corners and 6 safeties. That's a lot of safeties. There was questions about Reeves. I think they love Reeves as a special teamer and as a leader. But Owens kind of forced his way on the roster. If there's any real surprise, maybe it's Castro Fields, who was only like last week, maybe 10 days ago, DQ kind of talked about how he had impressed him.
Yeah.
The rest of these dudes, I don't think there's a big surprise anywhere. 5 corners ain't enough. You need 6.
No, there's more. Yeah, there's more coming there.
Yeah, dude. I mean, you have packages with 4 on the field. And then I know that there's been some change. Maybe corners aren't as involved in kickoffs as safeties because you want a little size there. But like, they're not going into week 1 with 5 corners, period. I think Eric Scott, I've talked about it, the kid they drafted in Dallas, that DQ and Joe Witt drafted last year in Dallas, who's now available. I think that's a prime candidate to watch. I think there's this kid, I don't want to butcher his name. I want to say Jahoko, the Dallas drafted DN that is somebody to watch. What I know is 5 corners isn't enough, and something's going to happen there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple spots where you can. I am interested to see if, just like we were talking about with Colson Yankoff and that tight end roster spot, if maybe Michael Walker might fall into that, or Dominic Hampton fall into that kind of same role where they make the initial 53 and then kind of they play the practice squad, active game during the season. But you need more than 5 corners. That's a given. There's going to be a change coming there.
Junior Fehoko is the DN from Dallas. Now, he got hurt in that last preseason game. I don't know how significant, if significant that is, but Eric Scott would be a name for me to watch. The specialist is what we expected. Tress and Ott. And then I think York, I mean, it was 1 preseason game, but he made both kicks, made both extra points, kind of drilled all of them. Like, I think you're going into week 1. Maybe you put a kicker on the practice squad, but I don't think there's competition coming at kicker right away. They just traded a pick for him, even though it's a conditional 7.
I'm fine with giving this guy a run, see what happens. If he's able to make some kicks, keep him around. If he, turns into any of the other dudes that have been here the past couple of years, then you just get rid of him.
Running through the list of names that are cut that maybe we haven't touched on. Andre Jones Jr. is another draft pick that got cut. A former 7th rounders, those guys get cut. Anthony Pittman was a guy they signed from Detroit. You maybe thought with those ties to Newmark, that might carry the day. It obviously didn't. He had been primarily a special teamer in Detroit anyway. Talked about Stromberg. The tackle they brought in, Armani Taylor, didn't do enough. They also are putting 2 guys they brought in, Taylor Stallworth and Norrell Pollard, to the IR. Maybe that's long-term defensive line depth. Maybe that's just stashing guys. Chiganuzium, we didn't mention him. Chig was a undrafted guy they brought in, gave him a little money to get him there. Chig ends up not making the roster. That's a prime practice squad guy. We've said that about 100 people.
And there's 100 players that were released elsewhere that are prime practice squads.
Your guy, Potato, there was some thought he might make it too.
I mean, there's no spot for him with both Ridgeway and Federian on this roster.
Right.
If Ridgeway, he's a perfect guy for a practice squad. I don't think he's getting claimed by another team. He's played solid when he's gotten an opportunity, but I don't know that he's wowed you at any point to the point that you felt like he had to be on the roster.
Agreed. So here's what I wanted to do. I wanted to react. I feel like we've reacted. I have some specific things to ask about, but before we do that, I want to remind everybody, starting with the Tampa game, week 1, we're going to have this post-game show on the Monumental app. We need y'all to be there and show up in force and let the people know that even after all these years, the momentum is still very real. It's a really cool opportunity for the big man and I. And I think a lot of people want post-game content, and we know how anticipatory a lot of folks are for the post-game pods. This is your chance to watch it live. Now, you'll still be able to hear it, download it, whatever later, but if you want to be part of the live, you can be part of the live. We will tweet out when it's going. Maybe we could do some questions at the end from Twitter or something. We'll figure all that out, but it's going to be dope. The other news of the day, Mitchell, is the new stadium name. Northwest Stadium, Northwest Federal Credit Union buying the naming rights. My biggest takeaway to this is cool. In the biggest thing is that this is just normal sports business. The Steelers are probably the most well-run operation in the NFL, and they just changed team names. They play at Acrisure Stadium and not Heinz Field anymore.
Yes.
Capital One Arena was previously Verizon Center. This happens. This is normal. With every business story in the previous administration, we always wondered what it means, who hates Dan the most. Clearly, FedEx hated Dan, but this is just normal business.
Yeah, listen, it's a name of a stadium. They just spent $6 billion on this team. They're going to make the money where they can make it, and obviously getting a team stadium name is part of it. I don't think there's really much to discuss here other than it's going to be awkward to get used to calling it Northwest Stadium.
Yeah, we're going to have to come up with a nickname, maybe the Fed.
I like the Fed. A little close to FedEx, potentially, to be a little bit odd.
Right, but FedEx was their brand name. This could just be right. But I hear you. The only thing, I don't know enough about Northwest Federal Credit Union. Clearly, I know they sponsored B-Mitch's pre and post game stuff for a while. I know they've been a sponsor of the Commanders for a while. Obviously, it's expanding. This deal runs through 2031, I think. And if I had to guess, there's probably an out if a new stadium opens up. If they get RFK and you get a dope new, probably domed stadium, whatever that is, half a mile from the United States Capitol, and then all of a sudden you're in the running for Super Bowls and Final Fours and everything else. I'm cool with Northwest Federal Credit Union. I'm not taking any shots, but the stadiums that typically get Super Bowls are international major brands, like Mercedes-Benz Dome in Atlanta and Hard Rock Stadium and SoFi Stadium and Jerry World's AT&T Stadium. I think the next joint, I'm thinking, who's based here? Marriott, Lockheed Martin, United
Amazon
is a hub here. Amazon, right? I think this is all right. Let's get this done now. This is a great deal. We love our partners, but I do wonder if the next stadium is something on a bigger scale. But I also don't care. It's not up to me. That's up to the salespeople and Josh Harris.
Yeah, and they're not getting a Super Bowl until they get a new stadium. So all of this is kind of a moot point until we figure out what the hell's happening with the new stadium.
Yep. All right. I got some superlatives. We're going high school yearbook style. Ready?
All right. Let's do it.
Biggest surprise today.
Colson Yankoff. To me, that's the one name that I didn't have on my radar in any way, shape, or form. You did. So hats off to you for discussing it at least.
I don't listen, man. Everybody knows I will pat my back when necessary. Yeah. I liked the kid and thought he showed some stuff. I don't know that I had him making the 53.
Right. But on Sunday, when we did the podcast, we were talking about Cole Turner, and in the discussion about him having a poor game, I believe you said something along the lines of this might open the door for somebody like Colson Yankoff. So whatever it may be, regardless, that was my big surprise for today.
Yeah, I think it's I don't know who my biggest surprise, and I don't know that Chig or Castro Fields like forced their way on. And I think this is a really good example of an initial roster not being your week one roster. But I do think that only going with 5 corners on this first roster is pretty interesting. I think they're obviously going to change that, but that does stand out to me a little bit. Biggest, I don't know if that counts as my biggest surprise. The Henry thing was a bit of a surprise, and
Yeah, absolutely.
maybe it's a tie, but I'd put Yankoff in there too. Not necessarily cutting Cole, but like cutting Cole and still keeping 4 tight ends. What do you think the biggest statement was? I think the biggest statement was trading away Jahan Dotson. Honestly, I think the biggest surprise was trading away Jahan Dotson. But like today, what do you think the biggest statement was?
I think it kind of dovetails with the KJ Henry, what we talked about. I think keeping a guy like Javante John Baptiste over KJ, who might have a little bit more immediate ability to help this team, I think kind of makes the bigger point with this roster and with this coaching staff that while they want to win games and play as well as they can this year, big picture, it's more about building for the future and recognizing that this is a multi-year thing. They're not here to they they don't think this roster is going to go win the Super Bowl right now.
Yeah, and at least listen, every player that takes the field in Tampa is fighting like hell to win that game. Every coach is game planning like hell to win that game. The front office wants to win, but has a different, bigger picture to look at. For me, and I don't know that this is the biggest surprise again, because our biggest statement, because it's not a surprise. But dude, the demise maybe is a good way of saying it, and not to be unfair, but like Chris Rodriguez last year ran for 4.8 yards per carry and played in 13 games and was getting some real work late in what certainly was a lost year. But you keep Jeremy McNichols. I mean, this is a guy that he's kind of a journeyman. I mean, he was drafted back in 2017 and has played. How about this? He was drafted in 2017 and has technically played in 37 NFL games and only has about 120 more career rush yards than Chris Rodriguez. Like, that to me is like a statement. Like when Dan Quinn said there's no sacred cows and we don't care who's been here, who's new here, we're looking at everybody fresh. Like, and it's not a surprise because if you've been watching, C-Rod's not part of the plan, but that seemed pretty big, I think.
I think it, I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful to Chris Rodriguez because this isn't where I'm going with it, but he's not a game breaker. He's not as high athleticism. He's not a, break a run for 80 yards type of runner. He's more of a, for the most part, a between the tackles guy who's going to lean forward for a couple extra yards along the way. And I think you're seeing kind of an offensive philosophy change where they want more guys that can be your big play threats, that can, make big plays, can take a swing pass and take it the distance, as opposed to a guy that's going to fall forward for a couple of yards. I like Chris Rodriguez. I think he's done a hell of a job in a couple of years here, but I think it's just the change of philosophy of this offensive staff that is really a difference.
Well, and let's be clear about McNichols, and this is worth pointing out. It was, I guess, 3 years ago now. It was the 21 season for the Titans. He did have about 250 yards through the air. So, like, that is something different he can offer, to your point that, like, Rodriguez may be just like another lesser version of what at least the initial thought of Brian Robinson was, and McNichols is a different type of player. We maybe already hit on this. What do you think the best news was today?
I think Tyler Owens is the most fun storyline just because he kind of all of these guys, I think, Colson Yankoff, is a good story and whatnot. Tyler Owens bullied his way onto this roster. There wasn't a spot for him. There wasn't a spot for the sixth safety, really. But between his play on the field, you could see his energy levels, and most importantly was his work on as a gunner and punt. I mean, you saw him just make plays all preseason long, and there were a couple times that he would just that he beat he beat his guy to the outside and would just get a free run at the kicker at the kick returner. I think he's the one guy on this roster that really forced his way on, and to me, I think that makes it the most fun.
I'm going to go a different direction. I'm going to say Jamin Davis.
Yeah,
This is a guy that really hasn't found any success. I mean, there's been flashes, but there's been bad flashes too. These guys get here and they almost immediately don't pick up his option, which they shouldn't have. But that was like kind of his introduction to these fellas is, yo, we're not picking up your option. Oh, and by the way, we want you to switch positions. And he's done what they've asked and made the roster, and in spurts in the preseason has shown some ability at the line of scrimmage. He's obviously a freak athlete, and maybe he emerges as a difference maker for them this year, but maybe he also has changed the trajectory of his NFL career. And I think that's kind of a cool story.
absolutely. I like that one.
All right. This one is us trying to see into the future, Mitchell. Most likely next move. This is my last one.
I'm going to stick with kind of what I know and just stick on the offensive line. And I think there's a couple interesting names out there at tackle that could be um, thrown around. There are a couple veterans that were cut today. I know Lyle Collins has had a ton of issues with staying healthy and all those things. He was cut today from, I believe, the Bengals. I think that's going to be an interesting, or he's cut by the Bills. Sorry, he played in Dallas. This coaching staff has seen him, so they know kind of about him in some regards. I'd be interested in if he's healthy and seeing how seeing what he can do on the field, if he's maybe a practice squad guy or maybe a replacement for Trent Scott. Another veteran, the Saints cut, Jesse Owens, who's a dude who's played swing tackle, guard, center. He's played every position on the O-line. I think he might be an interesting name as well. There are a couple other guys out there, but if you want to see in the future, La'el Collins is donning the burgundy and gold by Wednesday, possibly in a practice squad uniform, potentially in a full roster uniform.
There you go. I think Eric Scott could really end up here. You know, it's going to be interesting, but Dan Quinn in the past, if you go look, has been pretty effusive in praise of Scott, just kind of the guy he was, the toughness he showed. I also think they got to kick the tires on Noah Brown. In the last 2 years, Noah Brown has outproduced almost everyone Washington has, not named Terry McLaurin. He's 6'2", so a little bit bigger. Had a really good season last year. Was in Dallas with Dan Quinn prior to that. Those will be the guys I'm watching, but corner and receiver for sure, I think are where they're going to be looking to make a move.
Corner, receiver, tackle. Those are my three in that order.
Tackle, but here's the difference. You tell me if you disagree. Corner and receiver, I think they might add somebody that like plays week one.
Yeah.
And tackle, I think, is a depth thing instead of Trent Scott.
Yeah, I mean, it also depends on what these injuries end up looking like on the O-line as well. But yeah, I agree with you. I think if they sign somebody that has an impact right away, you're definitely looking wide receiver or corner.
Well, dude, I mean, we said that, and we're speculating, right? In no way am I like making a statement. And what we said it about Johnny Newton, maybe there's an IR stent there. Maybe there's not, but maybe Brandon Coleman too. Like
I think the fact that you can put guys on IR now before the season and still bring them back in that first 4 games probably tells you they're not thinking that that's going to have to be the case because they're hoping that they're going to get back. But yeah, you're right. I don't think in the next 2 days we're going to know one of those 2 guys going to the IR because like they did with Jordan McGee, if they really thought either of those guys were long-term, they would have done the same thing with them now and created an opening.
Well, the only difference is they know McGee needs the time because he had surgery. It may be something like, okay, we can get this tackle we really like. We got to come up with a roster spot. Is Coleman definitely out the first 3 weeks? Because let's just make this move. That way we've got the spot, we've got Brandon, and we've got tackle X. And, by the time Brandon's ready to come back, there's overwhelming odds we'll have another roster spot.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be. I think we have 53 now. How many changes do you expect by 1 week from today or by Wednesday? I
That's
mean,
a
I think
great
we're going to
question.
have.
That's
Let's
hold
say
on.
call
Let's
it.
pick your number.
All right, let me go through this roster and look.
Or I mean, we could set an over under. I think like 6.
I was going to set the number at 5.5. I think the number might be 5, but we're right. We're both right in that same ballpark.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, there's not a bet to be had when we're kind of saying the
Yeah.
same thing. And maybe it only ends up being 2 or 3. Like they are unable to
Yeah.
get who they like or whatever. I don't know, but this is very much a work in progress. Very much.
Yes. And as I don't, if there were 34 changes this year between last year and this year on the 53 man, I think even next year there might be 10 to 15 changes as well. Like this is an evolving process, and they're looking to improve pretty much across the board with this team. And I think as we look at the way that this all played out, I think it should preach to fans, how they really are approaching this season.
If you had to pick one, Hartman dealing with the shoulder or McSorley, who do you want?
I I like McSorley because I think he can help you more in a pinch or in an emergency. But I also think because of that, I might go Hartman on the practice squad. I don't know. McSorley's getting another opportunity. And if he does, kind of you tip your cap to him and say, good luck. But if things go all the way south and they need a fourth quarterback, I kind of think Trace will be sitting out there and available. And he's already shown how quickly he can get up and running. I mean, it was impressive what we saw from him, considering he was there for about 10 days or so in camp. So I think I go Hartman and then try and figure it out. But I also would IR. Can you IR a practice squad player? I don't
No,
really know
I don't
how
believe
that
so.
works.
You
Okay.
could probably
So,
put him on IR. It doesn't matter because Hartman's not there. But
right.
if you have him
Okay.
on I mean, I can't imagine they'd allow you to do that because that's just too much of a stash. I think you'd have to reach an injury settlement and then try
Right.
to.
Yeah.
Also, so Quinn has talked repeatedly about a 70-man roster. Here's how it works. There's 53 players. Then you are allowed to put 16 to your practice squad. But the little loophole that makes it 70 is the International Pathway Program. That player can be on your practice squad, but not count towards the 16. So my man's name is
Hagigi or something along those
I think it's
lines.
Hagai, something like that. Um, I don't know. We butchered it, but that dude's going to be on your IPP player. All right. I
Yeah.
think that was relatively tight. I think we
The
handled that.
guy, the guy Chisholm and Duisi is the best that I'm gonna do for the name.
Great. Um, last thing before we go. I
Yes.
have a fantasy draft in less than an hour. It's 7:39 p.m. for timestamp guy. I have the 7th pick in a 12 team league. This is my high school league. We've been doing this since probably 1995 when we had to go to this little deli and steal the USA Today to do it all by hand
Hell yeah.
out of the box scores in the back. This is a 2 running back, 2 receiver, 1 quarterback, 1 tight end, and a defense. Like super bare bones. No flex, no PPR, no nothing. It's incredibly hard and kind of ancient but Pete would definitely call this the dark ages, right?
Yes.
I've done 0 research and have no idea what to do. Who should I be looking for at 7? And give me some fantasy nuggets, Mitchell.
So I just did one of these drafts last week, and I tweeted about taking De'Ami Brown with the very last pick in the draft, and it was interesting reading their results. At 7, you're looking at probably one of the receivers.
But running back is like super important in this league.
So Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, somebody along those lines, Jameer Gibbs, but you might be able to get him on the way back.
Yeah, part of me's thinking Henry, dude, which might be crazy, but I don't know.
Kyron Williams is super interesting. I mean,
What
when he took
receiver would you
over,
want at 7?
Garrett Wilson.
I do like
Um,
Wilson.
I'm on Ross St. Brown. Jamar Chase is like up in the air whether he's playing. I think today they were just talking about him, but he's been dropping super far in these drafts, and I think that's mostly because you don't know whether he's going to play, but also like what's his name? Burrow didn't play much last year, but that dude's a fucking superstar. That's the first
Well,
one I've dropped in a long time here.
I mean, if you want to know how me and the big man really talk. All right. I'll tweet out my team at the end of the night. Practice Wednesday, practice Thursday. You're probably getting one. Maybe we do a Thursday pod.
Yeah,
Let them breathe a little. Make sure you
I
watch
think
the coach games. What?
yeah, DQ and AP are doing a joint presser tomorrow, so on Wednesday. So if something newsworthy comes out of that, we'll give you a pod. Otherwise, I think Thursday is the day. And yeah, what JP was about to start to say. Post game pod live on the Monumental Sports website, Monumental Sports app. It is Monumental Sports network at website. It is also not, you can watch it anywhere in
You're
the US
nailing this
and I think
promo,
around the
big
world.
man. Nailing it.
I know. I'm trying to figure out what I'm trying to say here, but yeah, it's available everywhere. Go find it, watch it.
Worldwide or just across the country?
I believe worldwide, but don't hold me to it. You know, this is
Write
one
a
of
check your butt can't cash, Mitch. Do it.
F it. Worldwide. All of our friends in London are going to be able to watch as well.
Watch this from New
Across the
Delhi.
US.
All right.
Yes.
We got to go. Made it this far. Mitch owes you international listeners a stream.